When I first started playing fantasy football, I had a plethora of information to go over. The rules of how to play, drafting strategies, player statistics, and other managers' tendencies. It was a lot. So my first few years, I really didn't put much work into evaluating NFL rookies in regards to fantasy. With players who had been in the NFL 2+ years, you had a great sample size of how they may perform in the upcoming season. But as I played more and more, I have seen that investing in NFL rookies in a fantasy football draft is important to win it all. What matters is how and when you invest, and that is what we're going to talk about today. Welcome to the Behavioral Sports Division Network. Hello everyone, my name is Statsu, the sports analyst here at the BSDN, and I ask, should you draft a rookie or rookies in your fantasy draft? Well, the short answer is yes. There is more you need to know before you take the risk. In 2021, the Ross Street Journal posted an article about a formula to draft the best players in fantasy. The four main components were individual talent, opportunity usage, surroundings, and risk-reward. Talent and surroundings are the quality, while the opportunity and risk and reward are the quantity. For this video, I will give a brief summary of the quality of evaluating a player, and then analyze the quantity aspect with opportunity usage being the how, the risk reward being the when, and we'll end with an example showing the how and when in action.
That sound? Quality.
Just like NFL scouts, when evaluating talent, you can review the physical traits such as speed, strength, endurance, mental traits, their personality, problem-solving skills, adaptiveness, and recall acuity, and their past experience and performance to give you an overall grade on their talent, which is a lot. Now, their surroundings include the coaching staff, their way to train, the play calling they do, preferences on offense and defense, the current offensive and defensive talent already on the team the rookie's going to join, and ultimately the rookie's compatibility with the coaching and the players on the team itself. Now, these assessments of quality take time to evaluate, and sometimes they're not fully visible until after the season starts or maybe a year after. So it can be difficult to fully understand all of this before you actually have to draft for the upcoming season.
Quantity, people. Quantity.
Now, evaluating the quantitative or quantity aspect can be mostly done before you need to draft. While understanding quantitative information can be tedious and frustrating, I know it. It can be a godsend when you're trying to pick between several players and you're on the clock to draft. While the player and the team data covered in this video is for redraft leagues, the information of how to use it and understand it is applicable to dynasty leagues, where drafting rookies is one of the main focuses. Now, let's get started with how do we draft rookies?
Many opportunities.
Before we get into the specific data that outlines opportunity and usage, let's hear from our local correspondents, Rudam Wefter and Tian Tapaport, about why opportunity usage are so important to understand for fantasy football rookies.
The more opportunities they get, the more yardage they're able to get.
Yeah.
Which is just equivalent to the more points you're able to get. So if you can start getting a grasp of which players are favorite targets, like with Rodgers, it's easy. Like Lazard on any other team, you'd be like, okay, he's not getting too many opportunities. But since he's on the Jets with Rodgers and he loves him, and so with those increased opportunities, it's just increased potential for points within your league.
Or if they're a good run blocker, that is a huge thing I look for. 'Cause if you're able or pass block, I should say, on the backfield in particular, you're going to be out there in third down. You can be out there for potential dump offs, plays like that. And those little plays that can get you those extra half point, 1.7, they can be a big difference. Obviously, the offensive lines, how they are, how good they are in run protection, pass protection. Another big factor that's worth considering. You're looking at your top wide receiver or your top running back. Because there's guys that touch the ball 20, 30 times. They only average 3.5 yards per carry. They can barely get to the line of scrimmage before getting touched.
Now that we understand the importance of opportunity and usage, what do we look at? What data do we need to find? Well, there's a lot of statistical data that you can go through. These are the 6 that I found most accurately reflected the possibility of opportunity and usage. For opportunity, also sometimes referred as volume, there is the total team offensive plays. How many offensive plays are on average per game for a team? Position target total. how often is a certain position targeted per game per team? And then position snap total. How many offensive snaps are happening per game for each team? For usage, it starts with air yards. How often is the ball in the air from the quarterback to the person receiving the target? Then deep pass attempts and targets. How many times is the quarterback throwing deep passes, which is more than 10 yards, and how many times is he doing that for his team on average? And then lastly, red zone attempts and targets. How often is the team in the red zone? How many attempts do they have in the red zone and scoring? And how many targets happen within the red zone on average? Now you might be thinking, that's a lot of information I'm going to have to look up. I don't know if I can do that. And I understand. So I gathered all this data to give you some examples. Now, if you want the specific data, you can comment or email me and I can send you the data, because I believe everyone should do at least a little bit of work while working towards playing fantasy football. Now, after I gathered the data, I had to score each section of data and then average it to find the best possible outcome for scores for rookies based on opportunity and usage. For this example, I'm going to use a pretend player and kind of go through the process of how I would score a rookie based on their opportunity percentage and usage percentage. As you can see in our example here, we have the famous Bobby Boucher Jr. from the Mud Dogs, who is more famously a linebacker, but we're also going to put him as a running back as well for the offensive position. Now you can see below there's two types of scores we're trying to get: the volume percentage score and the usage percentage score. And the way this was compiled together was that each data point had a score between 1 and 32. Because there are 32 teams in the NFL, it started to be ranking by the best team to the worst team. The best team having 32 points, while the worst team having only 1 point in that certain category. Now, as we first see the VP score, or the opportunity and volume score, we see that the Mug Dogs scored 15 points on the total team offensive plays. They scored 16 points on the position target total out of all 32 teams. And then they scored a 30 on position snap total out of all of the teams that are eligible. Now, for running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends, we take all three of those data points and divide it by 96, because 32 times 3 is 96, and we get our volume percentage score. Now, for quarterbacks, we only have two metrics, the top and the PST. Divide that by 64 to get their VP score. As we see for our example with Bobby Boucher and his Mud Dogs, he has basically a 64% chance of success when it comes to opportunity and volume in his new team. Now, as we switch over to the up score, running back, wide receiver, tight end, and QB all have the same formula. Sorry I didn't put QB in there. I forgot. Now, for the UP score, the Mug Dogs scored 17 in air yards, they scored 14 in deep pass attempts and targets, and they scored a 1, the lowest possible, in red zone attempts and targets. Now, the score ended up being 33%, which means that Bobby Boucher has a 33% success likelihood in usage in that team. So now that we have those two scores, what does that mean towards the endgame of understanding opportunity and usage for a rookie? Well, if you see below here, we're trying to get a return on investment, or ROI percentage. We'll get to more on what return on investment is later. So we're trying to get the two scores, average them to see what the ultimate percentage of success is. As we look at Bobby Boucher's, he has a 48% chance of succeeding as a rookie in this team of the Mug Dogs. Essentially, Bobby Boucher has a 48% chance to have a return on investment when you draft him as a rookie.
No risk, no reward.
Risk reward, also known as upside, focuses mostly on what I said earlier, return on investment, or ROI. What is that? To help us understand that, we'll go back to our correspondents, Woodham Wefter and Tian Tapaport, for more.
Like risk reward, one recent example I can say right away, Achan from last season. He was one of my last draft picks in most of my leagues. Obviously, he was third guy on the depth chart. Heard little rumors about him, but looking at his college production, not much tread on the tires, which is huge for running back. You knew they were gonna get him the ball. And once they did it, his first game, he dropped almost 50 points, something like that.
Yeah, it was crazy.
Yeah.
Sleepers are a huge part of fantasy football. That is where you win championships, in those middle rounds, in those late rounds.
Like you said, the sleepers, the hidden gems, especially among like rookies, where that's the highest level of risk reward. once you get past like round 2 in the fantasy draft, that's where it gets really volatile because there's just so much volatility in the NFL because of the various different factors that can contribute to on-field production, tread on the tires, changes in the roster. For example, one player could be performing amazing, like say, it's like Juju and Antonio Brown, but then you shift one thing, take one thing out of the equation, Antonio Brown leaves, Juju starts up and down.
Yep. So now that we understand the risk-reward importance, you first need to know what your league score settings are. Here's an example of standard versus PPR, or points per reception, scoring. To help you understand the difference of drafting a rookie in standard versus PPR, I came up with this example. When I took the average of the top 40 wide receivers and running backs in a PPR league, the average was 283.8 points for wide receivers and 256.3 points for running backs. In standard league, for the wide receiver 1 to 40 and then a running back 1 to RB 40, the average for wide receivers was 261.3 and the running back was 209.9. This showed a point difference for the wide receivers in favor of PPR by 22.5 points, and with the running backs in favor of PPR, 46.4 points. In 2023, 22.5 points would have made the wide receiver 9 in the standard league become the wide receiver 3. And for running backs, an addition of 46.4 points would have made the running back 9 the running back 2. That's an increase of 7 position ranks for wide receiver and 8 position ranks for running back. While most people that play fantasy football understand that PPR will have more points gained because of the scoring setting, for this purpose, it's to help you see that you can take more risks when drafting rookies in a PPR league than a standard league. And once you know that scoring setting in your league, it's time to see how, when you draft them, affects your return of investment of drafting a rookie. So as we look here, I have a bad, okay, and good return on investment. Again, return on investment is when a player gets a better position rank than the rank they were drafted at. So if we start with Zach Charbonnet from the Seattle Seahawks, who was a running back, his standard ADP in 2023 was RB36, and in PPR was RB37. Now, the end point total at the end of the season for standard was running back 48, a loss of 12 position ranks from when he was typically drafted, and then 106 points, or RB45, losing 8 position ranks, showing that most people drafted him got a loss of investment, which is bad. Then we go to Jahmyr Gibbs, who was a running back for the Detroit Lions. He was drafted most often in running back 16 in standard leagues, and in PPR running back 13. Now, in the end of the season for standard leagues, he went up to RB10, which was plus 6 position ranks from where he was drafted, and in PPR he was RB10, went up 3 position ranks. So this is kind of it does have a return on investment, it's okay, but it could be better. And then we go to the player that probably no one drafted and everyone got on the waiver wire, but let's look if he was drafted. So Puka Nacua, the wide receiver in Los Angeles Rams, his average ADP was wide receiver 117, and in PPR was wide receiver 105. Now, in the end of the year, for the standard leagues, he ended at the wide receiver 5, which is an addition of 112 position ranks. In PPR, he was wide receiver 4, an increase of 101 position ranks. This definitely would qualify as a good investment if you did draft him. This is because his return on investment was extremely large from where he would have been drafted from. Now that we've seen examples of a bad, okay, and good return on investment, let's look at how they did overall the whole year in 2023 rookies of each position. Now, in 2023 for wide receivers and tight ends, in standard league setting, 95% of the rookies drafted in those positions had a return on investment, but only 50% of them had a return on investment and were in the top 20 of their position. For PPR, all 100% of the rookies drafted had a return on investment, but only 30% of them in a PPR setting were also in the top 20. For running backs, only 75% of the rookies drafted last year had a return on investment, and only 40% of them were in the top 20 in addition to having return on investment. And then in PPR, again, 75% had a return on investment, but lower, 33%, actually were in the top 20 in the PPR league. Now, for quarterback rookies last year, both for standard and PPR, there was an 80% return on investment. However, for the return on investment and top 20, only 20% of those actually fell in that category. Now that you've had an overall idea of how rookies did last year, let's take a return on investment in action from an actual league perspective. Here I have the difference between two different managers in a league I was in. The first metric is how many of their drafted players stayed on their final roster by the end of the season, what percent of those had a return on investment, how many were in the top 20 and the top 10, and the percent that had ROI in the top 20, and what their league placement was at the end of the year. And I only include 13 because I don't include the defense or kicker if it was drafted. So with Manager 1, he had 5 out of 13 players still on his roster that he drafted, with Manager 2 having 7 out of 13. Now for Manager 1, 80% of those 5 had return on investment, whereas Manager 2, only 14% of his 7 actually had a return on investment. Manager 1 had 1 in top 20 and 2 in top 10, while Manager 2 had none in top 20 and 1 in top 10. So Manager 1, out of the ones he retained that he drafted, 60% of them had an ROI and were in top 20, whereas Manager 2 only 14% did. And the league placement for Manager 1 was first place, and Manager 2 was last place in the league. Now that we've reviewed how scoring setting affects your risk and reward, and give examples of what bad, okay, and good return on investment look like, and what the average was for positions last year, and an example from an actual league and how they drafted rookies or players, let's put all of this together and give a full example of a rookie playing this year in 2024. Now for this example, I chose Marvin Harrison Jr., wide receiver for the Arizona Cardinals. The information that I gathered regarding average draft position and whatnot was June 1st. I know it'll change a lot in the future, but for this purpose, just to show an example, I chose June 1st. So first we see the volume potential, the usage potential, and the combined return on investment percentage. We see that the volume potential for Marvin Harrison Jr. is at a 53% of its success, and usage potential is at 31%, with an average of 42% of a return on investment depending on where he's drafted in his team. Now you may think 42% is low, but this is just the quantitative part. The quality part that we talked about earlier, some of that would have to be assessed to fit in this as well. But just from a standpoint from the team he is in and the quantitative ability that the team may provide him, it's a 42% possibility of return on investment. Now if we look at the actual projections for standard and PPR projection, this will help us understand where we're at in the risk. For Marvin Harrison, the standard projection points is 156.9 points, which puts him at a wide receiver 14 in standard leagues. Right now he's being drafted as the wide receiver 10. So the difference of that is -4 from his worth versus where he's being drafted at. Now in PPR, the projection is 245.3 points, puts him at the position rank of wide receiver 12, but is right now being drafted in PPR wide receiver 9, which is a difference of -3. Now from the information we have now, we see that Marvin Harrison Jr. doesn't have the best opportunity in his team to return on investment, and currently is being overdrafted in that his return on investment is overvalued from his actual position that he's being drafted at, which makes it a more risky choice. So overall with this information, it seems like, at least for right now, maybe it's better to let Marvin Harrison fade down the draft and then maybe draft him or don't draft at all. Now in August, I plan to do a full analysis of 2024 rookie running backs, wide receivers, quarterbacks, and tight ends using the same process and formulas I detailed in this video. If you need to review any part of this video, I'll have timestamps in the description. Please email me or comment any questions that you might have or anything you want to add. I hope that you enjoyed this and this helped you kind of understand the importance of how and when to draft rookies in the Fantasy Football League upcoming. Wish you the best of luck. Have a good one.